South Africans have to, didn't they give away is it the Nelson Mandela plate? They lost that as well. The Aussies have got it now.
Oh.
Well, that one hurt, Manu. Anyway. Henry, how you feeling, and what do you want to get out of today?
Feeling quite chuffed. Doing well. It's always good to. I mean, it was a big battle. For those that didn't know, there's a rugby on against South Africa, the world champions. I mean, the score changed 6 times, and yeah, great game. Good result.
And the short of it is New Zealand won. Come on, Henry.
1 point.
Yeah, just looking forward to the call, connecting with everybody, and yeah, continuing on our journey. That's what I'm looking forward to. Manu, how are you feeling? And what do you want to get out of the call today?
I feel good. I feel we've learned something. I think we've grown. I think we'll be more objective next time.
Who's we, Manu?
We, the South Africans. Otherwise, I'm grateful that everybody's here. You know, I see John, I see everybody else, and you know, I look forward to continuing on the journey that we started some time ago. And I do feel what you expect.
Thank you very much, Manu. I was happy I got to sleep before 12 last night, but I wasn't happy at all waking up at 3:30 and couldn't get back to sleep. So I think it comes an age where sleep becomes an issue, yeah. Anyway, but I feel there's a lot of anticipation on my side to the outcome of where we're going with this. Yeah. Thank you very much. That's how I feel, and let me see. Susan, how do you feel, and what do you expect to get out today?
I feel fantastic for the connection. Love having you folks as a positive moment that I can anticipate in my week. And I expect that my perspective is going to get elevated. CJ, how do you feel, and what would you like to get out of today?
Thank you, Susan. Good day, everyone. Feeling good this Sunday. And what I want to get out of this is, don't have any specific thing, more of continuous learning process. Okay, who's next? Who haven't gone yet? John. I saw John hand up just now. John, how do you feel, and what do you want to get out of this today?
Thanks, CJ. I'm feeling great. It's a beautiful morning in Perth, wetter and cooler. Something happened here last night. I'm not sure what it was, but I wasn't involved in it. So I don't think Western Australia was really involved in it. But apparently it was very good for our economy. So yeah, I'm glad to be back with a fantastic group, and sure, I'll come away learning a little bit more. Question of how much. But yeah, I love stretching the brain a little bit and doing something that I wouldn't otherwise ordinarily do. So glad to be here. And who hasn't gone?
Well, you got.
Oh, Steve. Steve, so how do you feel? What do you hope to take out of today?
Steve, you're on mute.
Still on mute.
Still mute.
Still muted.
Yeah.
Let's move to Philemon while you work out your audio, Steve.
How do I feel? I feel pretty good considering I've had my ass kicked all week. I feel great. I've had a big week, and I'm just looking at it. It's a week that possibly people, and when you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, every single one of those needs I've had my ass handed to me in this week, and I realize I have fun. Still, it's a fun in a sadistic kind of way, but it's happening, and I'll watch why it's happening. What I want to get out of today is more of understanding that in a technical, academic kind of higher upper language. Steve, how do you feel? What do you want to get out of today?
I got it figured out. I had my podcast mic plugged in and it's up there. I didn't want to bring it down here. All right. So I'm just excited to Philemon. Thanks for acknowledging me. I feel real excited. I marvel at how few people on the planet would have the conversations we're having. What an oasis. What an oasis of beingness, just to be willing to be in the questions. I've gotten so much out of these calls over the last little while. One is, how do you feel and what do you expect? Intention is just absolutely critical. The other is, how do you feel and what do you take away? And I realized that this creates a conscious invitation to be present to the next experience. And that idea of being consciously present boggles my mind. So, so much of me and so much of my life has just been about automatic reaction to whatever the fuck was going on. So, so now I'm present to whatever that is without saying the F word again. And I'm just honored and delighted to be here. So I get to call on Joe. Lisa's here too. Hi, Lisa. Joe, my friend, how you feeling? What do you expect for today?
I'm feeling pretty good, and I'm just looking to continue my journey in understanding Bucky and systems, and trying to think at a higher level and benefiting from everybody in the group. It's always a pleasure to be here. So, Anne, have you gone yet?
Yeah, Lisa.
Lisa, how do you feel, and what would you like to get out of today?
Thank you, Joe. I'm feeling pretty good. I'm feeling very righteous because I actually did some gardening and I'm not a gardener. So I'm feeling like, yeah, I've aced it. So I actually had to stop to come in for the call and I was like, oh, I could carry on. No. So I'm really pleased to be here conversing with you all, and I'm just looking forward to what definitions we decide on today. So is it back to you now, Kelly?
I think it's back to me, yes.
Oh, okay.
How do I feel? John.
Yes.
You know what happened in Perth last night was only Australia's greatest football match.
Oh, is that what it was?
That's what it was. But you know what? Yesterday was Hogs Heaven for me. I got the NRL, I got the AFL, and I got rugby. I can't stand the idea of getting a gun out and shooting someone, but I love watching boom. I love the physical contact that you see, and then they can walk away and they can do it again next week. So to me, that's better than war. So if that's what we need to do to get out all that aggression, let's just get it out and let's get it done. What I'd like to get out of today is, and I'm with you, I really want to create an artifact and something that goes on. And I think, like, I've heard this question asked for over 30 years. What are the generalized principles? Who can name all the generalized principles? And it's like, how can you name them without necessarily having experience of it? It's just not something that I've been able to do. And so in the last couple of weeks, I think that we're getting to saying, well, I think that could be a generalized principle. I think that could be a generalized principle. And Philemon, since you're the guy seeking the answer, maybe you should keep the list for us.
I'm not really good at lists.
Well, that's why you got to experience it, mate.
How can you name a GP? I was writing something good you said down. Bloody hell. If you haven't experienced it, as long as I experience it.
Yeah, but that's, isn't that what it's about? And so it's like, to me, what I want to do is start saying, okay, is that a generalized principle? And then if it is a generalized principle, how can we create ideas and artifacts where people can experience them?
Well, I'm doing a project right now, Kelly. I think you're aware of it. Me, Laurent and I, where we've been asked to, just with this other mob we're with, to get a generalized principle and document and this and that. I said, you can't just have one generalized principle and focus on one. One relies on the other on the left and the other one on the right and the one behind it and the one around it. So I will do that list you're talking about as long as I'm aware of what we're talking about.
But that's the reason why I don't have a list. It's like someone says, well, give me a list. And I say, I don't have a list. But I do know that if we really want people to start thinking beyond, we have to say, well, maybe we can consider this, and maybe you can experience this. And I think that that's really very important from my point of view, because it's, if we're going to have a design revolution, and that's really what Fuller is talking about, a design evolution. And if we're going to have that, then we have to have some sort of record of it, and some sort of, we've got to have the crumbs going back, we've got to do a Goldilocks, so when we're moving out of it. And I actually think that when we look at our design, storage, to me, is a generalized principle of sort. Whether it's a generalization or a generalized principle, I don't know. But I do know that we store, and I do know that nature stores. And I do know that when we do stuff around it, you can manage around that by pure design. And I think so often we deny design. And the second we deny the design, it's used against us. As individuals, as groups, as governments, whatever. When you don't look at the design and say what's going on here, I think something goes on. And it's almost like, how do you hide the elephant? Put him in the room. And then everyone can say, oh, there's no elephant there.
Yep.
Right? And that seems to be the way we go about it. But anyway, I'd
Many
rather
naked
look.
emperors.
What's that?
Many naked emperors.
Yeah. Okay. So, Johnny, you going to rate for me today?
Of course, Kelly.
Good man. Okay. So let's go. Let's see. Let's make sure I can. Oh God, I've done this again. Oh, there it is.
Did Lisa share her opening?
She did.
Okay, well, somehow I missed that, Lisa. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
I can assure you, Lisa wouldn't miss it.
Cool.
I was saying how I felt very self-righteous because I'd done some gardening, Stephen.
Yeah. The one thing about Lisa that I know is she'll remind me.
That's
Cool.
true.
As does Henry. Okay. So
May I suggest a correction in your typing?
well, you can suggest whatever you like. It's
If you go down to the communicated line, then you see non-simultaneous. I think that should have a hard return before non-simultaneous should be brought down on the next line, but that's totally up to you.
It's not up to me at all. It's up to Fuller. These are direct from his writing.
That's exactly the way he wrote it?
That's exactly the way he wrote it.
Wow.
I've just put space. I've just
Yeah, that
broken them
seems
up.
so weird to me.
So Steve, I don't worry about stuff like that, but I'm glad you do.
Oh, dude, I live there. There's detail. I won't sleep at night because you said Fuller wrote it that way.
Well, I don't know what else to say to you. I just copied directly from the book. I'm not smart enough to do it any other way.
Cool.
And I don't spend the time to edit either.
All right,
Anyway, shall we go?
let's go. Ready?
Yeah, go ahead.
Universe is the aggregate of all humanity's consciously apprehended and communicated non-simultaneous and only partially overlapping experiences.
Okay, now how many times have we read that one?
More than once.
More
well,
than once. I can tell you over many, many years that I've read it so many times it hurts. What is he really saying?
May I say that it took me a second to realize that he then below that defines every one of those freaking words in that sentence. He defines conscious, he defines apprehended, he defines communicated, he defines non-simultaneously, he defines overlapping. And I think below that, if I could remember, I have my printout here, he even defines experience. So we can summarize what 301.10 is, or we can read these definitions and then slap those things together. Woo!
Yeah, you can do that, Steve. But let's go. universe's aggregate of humanity's conscious apprehended.
Yeah.
So at that moment, is it constantly changing?
Mhm.
That's that. So you can define all the other words, but the first thing for me that I have to realize is it's aggregating. So if it's aggregating, what must it also be doing?
Re-aggregating.
Re-aggregating.
And is there a disaggregate as well or not?
Yes, that's Steve's favorite thing.
But the universe doesn't do that, does it?
Well, it must do, John, because there's things dying all the time. So isn't that a form of disaggregation?
I don't know that it is.
No, you aggregate and disaggregate is a duality always. That's the principle that we have. As it's doing in, out, always.
That would be the entropy portion, Lisa.
Ah, gotcha.
Does
I
the
think it does have to,
metaphysical- but
I
does
think
the
it does have to be-
metaphysical disaggregate though.
You think so, Henry?
I'm asking, does it?
I
Say
think it
again,
has to,
Henry?
Does the metaphysical disaggregate?
Well, stars explode, don't they?
It
Mm.
moves together and it
Oh,
moves
disaggregate.
apart.
Yeah, it does. So entropy doesn't mean being more disorganized. It means more possibilities. And so I think the answer is yes, metaphysical can disaggregate or have entropy.
So that's where we get the formula, everything starts at one and divides.
Well, what if metaphysical is design, and what if that is just there? What if design is just there, and that everything that is aggregating and re-aggregating is just simply the vine growing on the design?
Going to where?
That's exactly why we need to define this first sentence
But I'll ask,
as a whole, not break it down into the parts.
I'll ask Steve, growing to where?
To itself,
If you growing to itself, I don't
growing to
understand.
itself.
No, I mean, if you say growing to itself, is it coiling? Or is it just expanding? What is that? Growing to itself.
What a good question. Look at the oak tree. It's a seed, it's a sprout, and now it's a big old oak tree. It always was that oak tree. That's the design. And somehow I reveal it to myself chronologically because I only apprehend sequentially based on my own personal experience. But then you have yours.
Where did all the nutrient in the soil go to? You say it's growing. What's coming in?
The nutrients in the soil, right?
Yeah.
They're becoming part of the the move towards complexity. So things are pulsatile and tidal and orbiting, and they're moving in all these different directions. So part of this is going to bring in our relativity. Where do we stand as the observer, and what is our perspective? And what's beautiful about this sentence, it includes all humanity's conscious. So it's not all about me, not all about you, it's about all of us. But our own perspectives will move in this dance as well.
How does
Okay, no, Joe, go on.
how does re-aggregate relate to recalibrate?
Well, aggregate starts to talk about what you include in calibration. What are you
Okay.
including? And so when you're looking at an aggregation of something, you can say, I'm going to aggregate these 10 points.
But now you've calibrated them by saying 10.
10, exactly right.
Yeah.
Now what's going to happen if I say it's going to be 15 points?
You're going to confuse me even further.
Well, that goes back to the relationship formula.
You bet. I was being facetious.
Yeah, I don't understand that though, Steve.
Well, if there are 10 points and now suddenly there are 15, I'm now 50% more confused than I were before.
No, that's not true.
Okay,
No, because when you look at the difference between 10 and 15, it's not linear.
it's not linear.
No, it's relationship to interrelation.
Dude, I just spent 3 hours today going through Fibonacci sequence and phi. So, dude, I get the relationship stuff, but I'm
Okay.
grokking it still.
Okay, so when you say you've studied the Fibonacci sequence,
I didn't say I studied it. I said I've been reviewing it, but go ahead.
okay, but the point to me, to Joe's question about aggregation, and there's an aggregation and there's a calibration.
Absolutely, I agree.
And now when you say consciously apprehended, so you all of a sudden say, well, the tree's planted in a soil, and then all of a sudden you discover that the soil's alive as well.
Hmm.
And
And
what if
then-
I say the soil is the tree?
So
And the only thing that separates it is my brain.
So say it.
Yeah, the soil is the tree, and the only thing that separates it is my brain.
No, now what you're saying is we're going to calibrate that.
Okay, I agree.
Okay, so
The soil is the tree, and when I calibrate the soil and the tree, whatever that is, I end up with soil and tree.
yeah, and maybe as you become as you apprehend more, now you start to see the relationship of the water. The
Oh,
canopy-
absolutely.
The
Steve,
canopy.
It's more of the universe is the soil and the tree.
I totally agree. This is so exciting to me, I can hardly
what-
breathe.
Yes, because you go back to the definition of universe is, as he said, the aggregate of all humanity consciously apprehended and communicated non-simultaneously, only partially experiences.
And remember, the universe is scenario. So we're just calibrating a scenario.
Yeah.
When I differentiate between tree, soil, water, I'm calibrating scenario.
What does scenario mean? Steve,
Means all
because
that shit
now,
together.
now you are teasing me. What does scenario mean?
What does what mean?
Scenario.
Scenario, I'm just using Bucky's word. He says universe is scenario, and I like it a lot.
A
What
scenario
is
is
scenario?
a way of seeing things.
Scenario are the words I put on my experience, maybe.
Okay. Let's delay
Okay.
discussion on scenario and progress.
Joe, it still goes back to your question. Did that answer your question?
I think so.
Why are you hesitant?
I mean, I get the more you aggregate that, then you would be calibrating based on whatever you're actually apprehending. But I don't understand how a scenario fits into that.
Isn't the scenario the story of what's going on?
So that's the context.
Well, yeah, words create the context. Words create, like, to me, I always think you lead with your story and you measure with your numbers.
Okay.
You measure with the calibration. So we're going out there and we're saying we consciously apprehended. So what do we mean by consciously apprehended?
That we're aware, that we're aware of what we're apprehending, of what we're taking in, we're paying attention to it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then we
So,
communicate it. And how do you communicate it?
you communicate it by calibrating, essentially, right? In a way,
Or creating a scenario.
or creating a scenario, which is a story, and then you measure it from that point on, correct?
Yeah, and now you can start to see and only partially overlapping experiences. Isn't that the experience between the soil and the tree?
And the water.
Oh, yes,
And are they starting to overlap?
yes.
And now we start to put water in there. Now we
Oh,
put
now I'm-
nutrients in there.
Now I'm
Sunshine.
starting to. Now
What's
I'm
that?
starting to see how the elements actually fit in together, and how
I know.
nature fits into this.
Yeah.
Wow, that's really cool.
I see this as being like, often we talk about capacity and capability. Capacity being everything. If you look at, like, if universe is one, as being everything, and then everything comes in after that as a division, then you can calibrate. Aggregate.
And then, but it also in my mind splits conscious and aware.
Yeah.
So what are you thinking there, Susan?
Honey, you're saying conscious and aware, and I am just still like, I'm very focused on apprehension. And I'm totally in love with that difference between apprehension and comprehension. I'm feeling that tension right now. I love that apprehension, I think, is when I lean forward into the feeling of what might possibly be present. And comprehension seems to be much more concrete. That's like when I'm connecting it to all the other anchors that I already have. And so I'm sorry, I'm in a different tensegrity right now.
Okay, but if we look at that, and isn't that like when we ask the question, what is a generalized principle? And then we start to say, I can apprehend that.
Right.
The question is, do I comprehend that?
Well, because human lifetimes are finite, what I can say is I can spend my imagination and I can lean forward into all the testing that might need to go on. But to be actually verified as a generalized principle, that testing would have to exceed my incarnate lifespan.
Okay, so at that moment, would you say that everything has a lifespan as a generalized principle?
Ooh, very nicely done.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's one of our agreements on this planet right now.
It's awesome.
Okay, so did you pick up on that, Philemon?
Everything in this lifetime is a generalized principle.
No, everything has a lifetime.
Everything has a lifetime. That's what I wanted to say.
So everything has a metabolic rate. It lives and it dies. And then it regenerates. That's why it's regenerative.
And if that thing is what you call experience, mean experience as a start, as an end, and has a process in between.
So now let's test that and say, do words have a lifetime?
Yes. Yes and yes.
Yeah, and so do they have a living rate and do they die?
Yes, yes, and yes.
So now when you're starting to look at it, you say, well, it doesn't matter whether it's physical or metaphysical.
Right. Yeah, they can evolve.
They can evolve. What do you think, Philemon? Are we going to write that down and put it on the tablet?
So are you saying, Kelly, I just want to make sure I've got this right. So if we say take words, for example, we can say that because everything has a lifetime, a word can have a life, a beginning. It can grow out of use. It can be misused too. And then at some point, it may or may not come back again. It might have a slightly different meaning or whatever. Is that what you say?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
It's further than that. Lisa is not can.
Does.
Has.
You can see it happening. You know, we're into these 180 characters. And that just watch the morphing in front of your eyes. There's an assumption of comprehension. There's not an understanding of, I apprehended that word. Now I'm going to start to use it and comprehend that word. We don't stop long enough to actually define what that word is, and do words change? And the misuse is what tends to create new words, right?
So the new words are the reason the metaphysical changes, correct?
Or you get new definitions,
Yeah, so that's where, okay, that's why the metaphysical changes.
and it changes with, political and social and different aspects.
Okay.
I
Maybe,
mean, like the word nigger is no longer accepted. We don't use it as common language because it's no longer politically correct to use a word like that. And yet Kelly uses it. He uses it in the terms of context of nigger in the woodpile. People used to say it all the time. But it's not, it's not general use today.
Yeah, and it wasn't one of my bitter moments either.
So you could say, for example, gay and queer, which used to be seen as derogatory words. The rainbow community have taken back those words and now openly use them and have grasped the power of them.
That's probably a better example.
Yeah.
They've changed the connotation.
Yeah.
so I'm going to say that words change the scenario. They don't change the metaphysical.
No,
I think the metaphysical changes the words. We start with these feelings, and as we communicate, which is part of our sentence here, the communication is not just the word. We emanate through our own emotionality, through our own individual context. We add to what that word actually means beyond what is in any definition, beyond what's in any dictionary.
Which
And
The
is-
word-
what's
the word-
interesting, Susan, you said we add.
Yeah.
Right. I think we as
The
human beings,
the individual makes no difference. It's when it can communicate in a group. It's when
Yeah.
it comes to awareness.
yeah.
But I'm going to go with Susan.
Yeah, Steve?
I'm going to go with Susan on this because it's not just the words I say, it's how I feel about something. And so I can feel a certain way and have a scenario based on my feeling without being able to put an explicit word on it, because my beingness is vibrating and communicating at many different levels, just like the electromagnetic field is vibrating at many levels, but only 1% of it is visual. What if 1% of my communication or 20% of my communication is auditory through words, and the rest of it is just anxiety and is not measured unless you have some kind of infrared CTI scan, and Susan would know more what the medical equipment needed. I'm going with Susan on this. It's not just about words.
Where's Susan going? I don't understand what you mean.
Susan, what did you say? Because I agree with you.
I think it's
It's
more,
not that anyone's disagreed. That's the point.
yeah. So that-
it's at the
that-
level of comprehension because you've gone beyond the awareness. It's like levels of learning. You're at that point where you're starting to actually use it and evolve it.
I think if we continue on the text here, it will clarify itself. But suffice to say, let me just take advantage of this situation to say a word is a label on a perceived pattern integrity.
Yes.
It is perceived by the group as a pattern and integrity. And that
Why
pattern
is that
integrity,
so important? That's very important to understand. It's perceived as a pattern integrity.
The two groups may see that pattern integrity exceedingly different. So when I walk into an audience, when I walk into a room and I ask, are you vaccinated? There are, depending on how you feel about that word vaccinated, it goes in totally different directions.
And you could hear 3 people say yes, and each one of those 3 people are saying a different yes. And you could hear 3 people saying no, and every one of those people are saying a different freaking no, because their communication is not just verbal, it's freaking, I don't know, aura, whatever the hell we call all this energy that a beingness is. And part of that energy is expressed in words. And many times I say a word and the word isn't even close to what I'm really wanting to communicate. So words are part. And I'm going to be the first to argue that to find the right word is critical. That's why I love our conversation about what is the definition of this word. Because
so Steve, it still comes down to, you can have any label, any word you want.
Agreement.
It's now, what agreement do you put with that word?
absolutely.
And now when you're talking about it, and you're just the examples that you gave, what you're saying is that if you're communicating at a very different level, which is at a vibration level, then if you become consciously aware, you can actually start talking at that level. And so it's when people say yes, I've heard lots of people say yes, and I know they mean no.
Exactly.
Okay, and so at that moment, what's my responsibility? What's my accountability?
It depends on your operation at that point. If your
Okay.
operation is,
No, I don't think
empathy.
it does.
what?
I don't think it does. I think it comes down to being accountable at that moment and saying, look, this doesn't fit with me. Can we review that?
Yeah. And I totally agree with you. It's about accountability, but there are times when Susan's with somebody, she's a doctor, and somebody says, my leg hurts. And she looks up and see that they have a hole in their gut because they've been stabbed. She knows they're missing the point all completely, that their leg doesn't hurt, their gut hurts, and their nervous system is telling them that their leg hurts because the person is deflecting and somehow doesn't understand what's really going on for them. So there are times when there are times when I hear the wrong word, I want to create accountability, I want to create agreement, and I have that conversation. And there are other times when it's just not appropriate. That person needs compassion, they need empathy, they need to be relaxed, maybe.
Well, Steve, again, I would say if we progress, what you're talking about there is communication.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
John, let's progress.
Oh, I love this.
We've got one paragraph.
Well, here's what's important for me is that all of our discussion about
let John continue, and then you continue.
I
Because
just want to say,
everyone's right. Everyone knows it's there. John.
okay,
Consciousness means an awareness of otherness. Apprehension means information furnished by those wave frequencies tunable within man's limited sensorial spectrum.
wait a minute.
Doesn't that go to what you're just saying, Steve? About
Yeah, well, let's talk about the first one first. Consciousness means an awareness of otherness. Let's talk about that first. And how does that then reflect on our previous definition of the sentence above? Because nobody talked about otherness when they talked about consciously apprehending and communicating. And yet consciousness is the awareness of otherness.
The
So if I'm-
non-simultaneous, the non-simultaneous and only partially overlapping experiences. That's where it is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but consciously apprehended means that I must be aware of otherness, or else I'm not consciously apprehending it.
But isn't that all humanity? Is that not the otherness?
Absolutely, and that's why it needs to come into our description about that sentence up there. Nobody said the word otherness when we talked about humanity's consciously apprehended.
So
No,
what's your real point, Steve?
we say it's Steve many times. The oak, and the soil. Oak and soil. And
Yeah,
we
but
say
see,
so many times.
where's the word otherness in that, Manu?
But so what's your point, Steve? That's what I want to understand.
I'm not sure what my point is.
Well,
My point is that if
how
I'm
can
looking-
anyone here be sure?
Well, let me just say that about that, if I'm here and I'm standing there looking at that tree, and to me, the tree is the dirt and the water and the leaves and the air, and to you, the tree is that dead stump out there in front of you. Somehow, when we talk about tree, we've got to acknowledge otherness.
So
We got to
don't we acknowledge otherness by saying there's a relationship and an
Yeah, but-
interrelationship?
Exactly, we do, but I don't hear Republicans and Democrats doing that in the United States.
That's not
They're not
important.
on this call.
That's true.
Look, when we become conscious of the fact that there's a relationship, firstly. So are we all aware that there's a relationship?
It seems to me that if I become aware that consciousness automatically implies and explicitly denotes otherness, suddenly there's something sacred about consciousness.
Well, I think it denotes relationship.
Then I'll say there's something sacred about relationship.
But that's the qualification, Steve. Really, I mean, in terms of structure, because we have here what do you call it? A structure of thought. Consciousness means an awareness for the otherness. It means that there's this and that, and the two are related somehow. So it means there's in, out, in between.
In, out, between, and around.
Yeah.
And I introduced the word sacred.
Well,
Because-
that's why the tetrahedron was called the secret unit of account.
Love it. And I could say that's why.
And I think it's superfluous. Why do you need it to be sacred?
Because then I bring something different to the conversation.
Why do you need something different? That's my point. Why does it have to be sacred?
Because if more people understood communication as a sacred relationship, there'd be less bullshit flying.
How about if they just understood it as a relationship? The second you qualify and say it's sacred, you give it some mysticism. Why do we need mysticism in a pragmatic situation? It's a
Actually, there's one way, Kelly, would again that. Just say again in the geometry, the tetrahedron is a minimum volume.
Yeah, but why not say it's a minimum volume?
Yeah,
exactly.
You know, it's like as you go through this and you say to yourself, okay, I'm aware. Okay, Steve, do you still eat avocados?
Well, after seeing
I just asked the question, do you still eat avocados?
I ate one yesterday. I'm a fool. There's 4 people in Venezuela or Chile or wherever they are can't drink water because I'm eating a damn avocado. Jeez.
How many people on the call know that? I knew you knew it.
I do. And so there's something sacred about me eating an avocado because somebody is dying of thirst or their immune system is dropped because I'm eating that freaking avocado supported by that mafia gangster that stole their water. Damn.
You should be eating Australian avocados.
Okay, but now haven't we now started to get relationship and interrelationship?
Oh yeah.
And so when you start to look at that, and for any of you that don't, there's documentaries on what it takes to grow avocados where there's not enough nutrient and not enough water.
Yeah.
And how debilitating it is. But to me, that's becoming conscious of the interaction of relationship and interrelationship.
Yeah.
And that's now aggregation and re-aggregation. We know how to grow the avocado tree and make it create a whole lot of food. We don't look at what it's doing on its way through.
Right on. There are 22 words we've been describing so far in 45 minutes. That's about 2 minutes per word. And my heart is pounding. I love this.
Okay.
So should we continue?
Yes, we should continue so we can get down through it. Okay, John, keep going, mate. Are you going okay, by the way?
I think I had read apprehension.
Yes.
Communicated means informing self or others.
Can we talk right there for a second? Because pardon me, John, I think this is very important. Most people don't realize that when I communicate, I'm informing myself. Most people don't listen to themselves. And you and I think out of all the people on the planet, this group right here, we probably listen to people communicating to themselves. This is why Kelly said earlier, some people lie. You know they're lying, but they don't think they're lying, but they are lying because they're not listening to themselves. They're communicating what they think, not what's true for them. Just, I thought I'd point that out.
Henry and I used to run call centers for Rich Dad, and we would laugh endlessly.
Yeah.
Endlessly.
But they are communicating their truth. It's their truth.
Their truth,
Yeah,
exactly.
it's what's in their head.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's always true.
But they're not listening to themselves many times. Therefore, they're not communicating and informing themselves.
Well, they don't realize they're talking to themselves. That's
exactly right.
That's
And the
their
key to understand,
apprehension.
right? Anytime I talk, I'm talking to myself first. And if I'm not listening to myself, I'm just torturing myself and everybody else. I'll pause.
well. Now, bring in your vibration.
Oh yeah.
It's like at that.
It was Susan's vibration, by the way. It was Susan's vibration. It wasn't mine. I agree with Susan.
Yeah, but I don't know what you're agreeing with Susan with. Yeah, but again, it's like if you're communicating, and we're saying informing self of others. It's when you use a word, you can calibrate that word with a definition and agree to it. But when you have the vibration, it's a very different communication. And that's why we're always saying that words are so important, but it's the language in which the word is used and the context of it.
Also, we have to add in that communicated means that someone else understands what you've said. It
Yes.
can't just, you have to make sure they understand what you've said or vice versa.
So how do you do that when someone tells you a lie?
Well, that's where
And tell me you don't know when someone's telling you a lie.
sometimes, yes, sometimes no.
Yeah, well,
You come to somebody telling you a lie deductively.
what's that?
I say, you come, if somebody is telling me something that's not true, most often I'll come, if I come at all, to discovering that he's telling me a lie. That is through a process of deduction, because at some point there will be an incongruity, something that doesn't hold. That's how I deduct that you were telling me a lie. But otherwise, I will be oblivious of it.
Sometimes people are just misinformed. They listen to other people's opinions, which is not necessarily a fact. It's just an opinion, and they don't know.
And then they take it on. They take it on as their own opinion, in spite of the inconsistency, because they're not communicating with themselves at all. Agreed, Henry.
Okay, John, let's keep going.
Non-simultaneous means not occurring at the same time. Overlapping is used because every event has duration, and their initiating and terminating are most often of different duration. Neither the set of all experiences nor the set of all the words used to describe them are instantly reviewable, nor are they of the same length.
There's a
Okay,
ton of
so
overlapping.
At that moment, that's why when I look at a tetra and say, okay, we're going to tetra tune that, does something have a starting time? And then does it have timing? So as it's going through its life cycle, does it have timing?
Yeah.
Are there sequences?
Mhm.
And are there lags? And what's the one that we very seldom allow for?
Lag.
Hey,
Definitely.
gestation.
Me.
So if you're looking at that, we're saying, okay, we get that everything has a duration. And that goes to Philemon, if you want to look at fuller statement around that for a generalization, I think that that says it. Everything starts and everything ends. The thing that it doesn't necessarily say is talk about regeneration.
And you just jumped ahead on John because he's about to read that.
Okay, well,
Okay.
I'm just working on the same paragraph, Steve. I
I'm
don't
still-
jump ahead.
Experiences are either involuntary, subjective, or voluntary, objective, and all experiences, both physical and metaphysical, are finite because each begins and ends.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Now does it, Philemon, will that fit into our generalized principle as part of the thinking up?
Is that conscious and unconscious? Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, go ahead. Make your point.
Within voluntary and voluntary, that's conscious and unconscious.
And Joe, looking back up at the definition of consciousness, which means an awareness of others, then unconsciousness would be an unawareness of others.
You mean subconscious?
Now we're talking. We have
Yes, yeah,
conscious,
it would be
unconscious, and subconscious. Yeah.
That's
I have something to share because I just realized I went through this whole series, this whole what do you call progression of what's written in today's discussion, right? It started with Stephen talking about the seed of the oak tree and going into becoming a sprout in an old oak tree, right? And then I realized that then you start talking about the soil and the water, but then there's also then it went into right now the metaphysical, so it is, and I realize that this is what we've been doing. You see, when we looked at the sciences that are being taught in schools, right, even all the way up to university and so on, it is the physical. So what we did, I realized, is that we brought in the metaphysical side. Now I can say it's metaphysical. We realized that a lot of the content and the direction of that is being presented has never taken into account that it doesn't include girls, women in general. So a lot of the learning and all that is very, very male centric. It just ignores the feminine aspect of all these things that are being delivered, right, and presented. So what we did was, and I mean, I'm not just talking about women, but also the artistic aspect of also everything that's physical, right? So we started to add that into the curriculum. You can't find it in any book. So what we did was, okay, if you're working on, let's say, refraction, for instance, and we said, okay, look, ask the kids to look at where this appears in women's product services or our own experiences, right? And then we also started looking at where does it show up in art. So we started looking at science, but overlapping them into art, because otherwise it felt very, very lopsided, right? So, but just imagine what it is like trying to get that through to parents in Asia, right? So we ended up becoming very subversive, meaning that we give them the exams, but then we put all these components in for the children. Like we even included the human skills in science, in econs and all that, right? So when you look at the oak tree as I'm just putting it out there because I'm not sure where I'm going with this, but looking at where Stephen started with the oak tree, then you realize that the oak tree is not just a tree, but it's memories for a lot of people. If you have a swing that they used to swing on when they were really young, or the oak is a piece of art. I remembered that when I traveled to UK, I was looking for the oak tree. It was so hard to find it in London. I didn't know where to go to look for the oak tree. And I just wanted to see oak trees. So there's this whole other aspect of that seed to the oak tree. And I thought I just want to put it out there, because now, how do you tell that to that first, in education, it needs to come together. The second is, how do you find, it's so hard to find people who will be able to take, education to that, to that capacity. Yeah. Because most people don't think that way. And the education systems around is so rigid and limited that it's very lopsided. Yeah. So I'm just putting it out there because we're talking about this whole, all these meetings and so on to figure out how it works in the real world. So that kind of just popped up, and I'm just putting it up.
Okay, so Anne, at that moment, you brought in two things. You brought in memory, right?
Mm.
And let me go to precondition.
Mm.
And when you look at your education and our scientists, too much of it's preconditioned. So if you're working in this understanding that everything's in motion and it's not static, how do we get that across as part of a precondition, part of our memory?
If I may insert here, it's like you're looking over my shoulder at my notes, because this goes back to Joe's question or his query about conscious, unconscious, and subconscious. Because it seems to me that most people have an experience of macro, but they don't experience macro, they experience micro based on subconscious filters through personal experience. So there goes, I'm now combining Anne and Joe and you, Kelly. Go ahead, Anne.
Wow. Just repeat that last. Can you repeat that last bit, what you just said? Just that last bit.
I said that the oak tree is a micro experience of a macro. The oak tree is macro, but I experience it on a micro basis based on my subconscious filters.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Okay, so micro, macro.
Right.
If you use the two words, refraction and reflection.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of a sudden, if we're scientists, are we trying to refract or reflect? And what we've seen in the last 40 years of education is reflection, forgetting refraction, in my opinion. Do you understand my point, Anne?
Okay.
We're trying to keep it what it is instead of realizing that it's moving. It refracts and it reflects.
If it's refracting, it's in its own beingness.
Yes.
It's also reflecting. The problem is I only see the reflections based on my past experience, based on brain storage.
Based on memory and preconditioning. Yes. That's exactly
preconditioning. That's exactly your point, and I'm totally agreeing with you. And these are all subconscious labels. And now we bring in the sacred otherness, because I look at this tree and say it's an oak tree. You look at the tree and say it's a walnut tree. And if I don't hold you as a sacred entity, I'm just going to write you off and say you're an idiot. You don't know the freaking difference between an oak tree. But if you say it's a walnut tree, I'm going to say, ooh, here's a sacred part of me saying this is a walnut tree. It may not be a walnut tree, and I'm going to look closer to come to an agreement because I respect this otherness. And even if I thought you're a wild idiot Australian, I'd say, I'm an American guy. I know what's cool. You're from down under. Everything's upside down. I expect that of you. That's what too many of us do, is we take these experiences, shove them through our subconscious labels from our brain, and then make decisions about what's right and wrong, what's cool, what's not cool.
Steve, have you ever seen, to me, a tree's not a walnut or an oak tree. Ooh. A tree to me is a canopy of shade.
Steve, now you're missing one of the greatest joys in the world, is eating a walnut.
No, I'm not missing that at all. But I can tell you, I've had 15,000 sheep.
Yeah.
and I've had trees in the paddock, and those sheep don't say, "Hey, tree, you're a fantastic
Eucalyptus or walnut.
or walnut." They say, "Hey, this is
Thank you for the
keeping me
shade.
cool. This is keeping me cool." And
I read
I
someday.
understand that. So this guy from down under, the best thing he likes to be is under a tree on a hot day.
One of the coolest experiences of my life was hearing a poem about a tree's experience of being itself, how it gave shade to all the creatures. It helps plants grow. It uses branches to build houses. And this tree had this sacred experience of otherness. That was the most beautiful poem, one of the most beautiful poems. Thank you, Kelly.
And
Steve, can I say
here's my
something
point.
here?
Here's my point to Anne, is if we're going to change the education system, then we've got to put scientists where they're really at, as people that are experimenting and faithfully recording what's actually happening. Instead
At a
of
micro.
at micro and macro level. I wouldn't differentiate between the two. I wouldn't differentiate between the refraction and the reflection. They work together. But I think we're far too much on the actual reflection.
Agreed.
Right. And so if we're looking at that, because that's really what we're talking about. And each child in Fuller's world is a scientist. And they're faithfully recording through their sensorial capabilities. We don't have to give them that. They have that. And so how do we nurture that? That's really my point. Sorry it took me so long, Anne.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you. I like that. Mm.
Okay, so let's go. I'm really very keen on equilibrium.
Mhm.
Yeah.
If people don't mind if we go down to that.
Equilibrium between positive and negative is zero. The vector equilibrium is the true zero reference of the energetic mathematics. Zero pulsation in the vector equilibrium is the nearest approach we will ever know to eternity and God. The zero phase of conceptual integrity inherent in the positive and negative asymmetries that propagate the differentials of consciousness.
Okay, turn loose on that one.
Zero whole space.
Zero is space.
I say yes, it holds space.
It is space and it's everything else. It holds space because it is space.
No, zero whole space. Okay, so what's the both? It's a very valid point. So what is it that we're actually saying?
The macro zero is space. The micro zero is holding space.
But are we saying that when we're perfectly balanced between positive and negative, when we're doing nothing and going nowhere, that is where we find eternity in God?
Oh, that's where I'd personally find death and destruction and suffering and a bullet to my brain. No, that's only because I like the edges. That's why when I heard that. If that's where God is, I'm never going.
I think the first thing you have to do is, what is equilibrium? Because too often people talk about balance. What's the difference between equilibrium and balance?
Equilibrium is dynamic, balance is static.
Well, I would say it's not static because sometimes you have to move to keep your balance. So it's not static, is it?
No, you're confusing.
And they're not at the same point.
Balance is static, is this. This is balance.
How about balance is micro, equilibrium is macro?
No. Equilibrium has to do, no, I'm serious. Equilibrium has to do with a dynamic nature of energy. Energy flows,
right?
Energy always flows. Energy flows to the line of least resistance.
It's not just about dynamic, it's about dynamic relationships.
Yes.
Yes.
Balance is very linear, but equilibrium is about dynamic relationships.
Yes.
I can give you the definition here if you want, guys, or you can keep chewing on the bone.
Well, no, we're going to get to our own definition, but give us the dictionary definition, and we'll see whether we'll swallow it.
Some wiki defined site. Equilibrium and balance is the equilibrium, is the condition of a system in which competing influences are balanced, resulting in no net change, while balance is a state in which opposing forces harmonize. Equilibrium. So it's very, it's not written very well here.
So it's more than opposing forces. It's, as Kelly had said, it's a set of dynamic relationships within a system. If the reason the price of something changes could be a number of different things. The reason the supply of something changes could have a number of different things. So we're measuring those two because we're focused in on them, but that's a very macro way of looking at it. It's a balance of dynamics relationships rather than just two opposing relationships.
So the vector equilibrium.
The system is macro. The item measured in the system is micro. Equilibrium
They're parts,
is micro,
yeah.
balance. No, I think there's equilibrium even in the part. So I'm going to retract that.
You see,
Because even the part has its own little micro system, right?
No, the parts are, they don't have their own system. They're part of the system.
Yeah, but in micro sense, the tree has a system without considering the soil and the water, because the tree system is a process of moving the minerals from the soil and the water through it. But that's one system. A treeness is different than a bushness or a steveness. Each of those are separate systems that exist within the system.
Okay.
Eh? What do you think? There are microsystems and there are macro systems. Mitochondria are a macro system inside of Steve, the are a microsystem inside the Steve, the macro system. But Steve is a microsystem inside of this phone call. And Steve is going to be quiet now.
okay, so at that moment, I've had a thing on my wall for now 5 years. And I write it and I talk about it. I say, define the boundary. If I define the boundary, I'm now looking for the equilibrium inside that boundary.
Right.
How do all the dynamic forces impact the concept? Now, my thing is it being impacted unknowingly, which I suspect it is. I suspect that when I draw that circle, I'm now trying to make a decision. I'm creating my own idea, my own boundaries. Now, what do I put inside that? How do I define that? And what I want to know is it my ability and my intention, or is it well beyond me? And is it basically unknown? And I get to the point where I listen to people use words and see how they influence that thought. And then I watch, and we spoke about critical mass last week. I watch when we hit a critical mass to see just how much force there can be applied inside that circle that are not me. Do you understand my point?
Yes, so much now. It makes sense. Okay, I love what you just said. Define the boundaries and then look at the equilibrium between everything in the in-between. So if the equilibrium in the in-between are competing influences, definition of equilibrium, and making them balanced within that boundary, well, then moving forward becomes a lot easier. It's like a SWOT analysis: strength, weakness, opportunity, threat, and trying to create equilibrium between it all, bring the weaknesses into the strengths and the threats into the opportunities as such. So if you can do it in your day-to-day stuff, in your business, in your whatever it is, define the boundary. I love it when you said that. It kind of glued together for me personally there, Kelly.
Well, I mean, anybody that's in business, if you don't define your boundary, you're in trouble. Because you will not see the dynamic forces.
That's what's been missing for me. I do it, but nowhere near to the effect I could do it, knowing now that I've identified, little characters within the process.
And I think it's important. I draw this boundary and saying, okay, I'm going to develop a process within this circle. I need to test that thesis and say, is this a complete system, or are there outside forces working on these boundaries I've drawn? So my boundaries are arbitrary. They are objective rather than subjective.
You must draw a boundary. That's the first thing you do in
Absolutely.
your process of comprehending. You must.
Yeah.
So now is the boundary physical or metaphysical?
It's physical.
Yeah.
Not necessarily.
Not
It's
necessarily.
Isn't
It's
it both?
arbitrary.
If you're drawing it, doesn't it have to be? I mean, if you're creating it, it doesn't have to be physical.
No.
Are words physical?
Your mind deals with the metaphysical.
Your mind
Yeah,
deals with
yeah.
the metaphysical exactly how I see it. So
And the brain is the problem. The mind can handle it. We just got to come out of our brain and move into our mind.
You've
No,
got
the
to,
brain,
you've got to
Steve,
get
the brain
rid of-
is not a problem. The brain is there. It does its thing.
It's
Mind
preconditioned.
relates and interrelates.
Yeah, you've got a memory. Anne said it very well when you said you have a memory.
Yeah.
And that memory is there through preconditioning of a sort. So when you look at it, Joe, your example of a boundary, the Americans have tested the concept. The Chinese tested the concept of a physical boundary, right? How's Trump's boundary doing?
It's not doing too well.
Okay, but what about the metaphysics of that boundary?
Still there.
Still there.
It's like if
Yeah.
I said, listen, do that one more time, I'm going to beat the shit out of you. Right now, those words aren't physical, but depending on your experience, you go in your filing cabinet. If you've had the shit beaten out of you as a kid, whatever, those words now become physical. You like a person could cower in fear because of the experience. But if you're a trained fighter or something like that, well, then those words would mean nothing, and you would take a different action to the action proposed.
Agreed. If Philemon said he's going to beat the shit out of you, and if I said I'm going to beat the shit out of you, you'd be much more afraid of Philemon than you would be of me, right?
Well, the person I'm going to be afraid of is the person who says that it means it.
The person I'm going to be afraid of is myself for reacting one way or another to that without looking at the total communication.
Well, that's very self-aware, Steve. But again, we're talking about memory.
Absolutely.
And so
Memory or awareness.
awareness, and in my mind, when I draw a boundary, I better mean it. So many people talk about I'm going to do this, but never mean it.
That's right. When I say beat the shit out of you, I don't mean it. If Philemon says it, stand back. Better quit doing that shit.
I'll tell you, being if you really wanted to make money fast, being a drug lord would be one of the faster ways of doing it, because people
Or an avocado lord. One of the
or
other.
an avocado. Well, avocado is too much work for me. But if you look at it, flogging drugs, if you're not willing to kill somebody, if you don't mean it, then don't get into that boundary. It's just ridiculous.
Absolutely.
People saying, "Oh, well, geez, that's a heartless point of view." No, it's a pragmatic point of view. It's like you can make money. You can make money. Making money is very, very, very simple. I can get a press and do it, or I can rob a bank, or I can sell drugs. But the thing is, are you willing to hold those boundaries?
Mhm.
And if you're not willing to hold those boundaries, don't do it.
And is it regenerative, or do I have to go out and rob another bank every week?
Yeah, and you better mean it, because your life expectancy will reduce, because it's all around your metabolic rate. So you tell me that you're going to have a long life. I mean, who would want a long life like Trump's got? Personally, I would not want that life, but he brought it upon himself because he's good at what he does. And whether whether you like it good or bad or not, he just does it. He says it, and he pretty much means I believe in Trump. And so at the end of it, you can evaluate him whichever way you want. But I can tell you, the guy is driven to I believe in Trump.
Mhm.
You're going to draw the boundary. You better be willing to work within the boundary and meet it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's pretty much just, you don't have to do any more calls just based on that one statement, because there's so much in that. Everything's in that statement there. Everything connected within it. That's the spider web, that statement. Whether you eat dinner is just how you interpret the twangs along the web. For me, anyway, the way I see it.
Okay, well, we can probably take on one last bit. I mean, this zero, the true zero, or the reference, or the energetic mathematics. When we start to look at it and say, okay, this is the true zero. John, if you're gonna draw a circle for law, what would your circle include?
Well, okay, I'm going to have a circle encompassing the law. It's got to encompass the community. So is it a state law, a federal law? Is it Western Australian, or is it Australian? To whom does it apply? And what are the requisites to be subject to it?
And if we're going to do litigation and go to a court, then we've got to take into account the demeanor of the judge, how the judge has held these things in the past. If we're going into a jury, then we got to anticipate that jury.
I've read some very interesting things, Kelly, in the last week about rule of law, and particularly from the point of vaccination, anti-vaccination. This whole thing of the interaction between law and government. Laws are actually intended to restrict the tyrant. The basis for laws, the basis of our English system, was the Lords standing up to the King and saying, you don't have absolute power over all of us. We will agree to the rule of law, but we've got to have a say in the law, and you've got to be subject to the law as well. And certain areas are protected no matter what happens. You can't impose laws on us that go beyond our personal rights, freedoms. It's an area I think is going to become increasingly important. I'm very curious to see what happens over the next couple of years as governments use emergencies to introduce restrictions they don't normally have the right to impose on the society of which they're a part. Very important, interesting area at the moment.
Amen,
John,
John.
it means the context changed, and we took it for granted, believing that it was the same as before. And then, yeah.
Was the same as before?
Okay,
What do you mean?
Pre-COVID, there was a context.
Oh, I see.
Within which the government didn't have the right to certain things. Then the COVID event, and the government takes those laws. That's pretty much the way they prefer to operate. And the context that changed is
Let's
made
step
permanent.
back. Let's step back. A major world event that provided governments with a great opportunity and excuse to introduce new laws was September 11.
Yes.
Right.
Using the threat of terrorism, the controls that have been imposed on banking and finance and information, and governments have used what happened with 9/11 to justify much more wide-reaching intrusion on the privacy of individuals and the control of individuals. If you think about the information you have to provide now, it's far greater than it used to be pre-9/11. And there are a whole lot of extra laws. And one of my concerns is that COVID is being used as an even greater excuse. There's a law before the Australian Federal Parliament at the moment to control our ability to use cash, to limit our ability to use cash. That's actually a law before the Federal Parliament that hasn't been passed yet, because then if you have to carry out all transactions electronically, the government, through its control over banking and finance, can have access to everything you do. Every dollar you receive, every dollar you spend, where you spend it. And I personally don't like that level of knowledge in the hands of third parties whom I don't necessarily trust.
Yeah, John.
That's interesting.
John, I'm just in absolute agreement with that. And I've been saying that 9/11 was the last time. I speak to 30-year-olds today, and they didn't grow up in a CCTV world. For our safety and well-being, there's cameras everywhere now. And that was they were around a little bit before, but that was post 9/11. And I'm of the belief that this is actually a number of things. And I think every generation, they like to do something big. Right? This is a number of things. UBI is going to be one of them, which is going to be cashless. Also, another big thing is we have taught kids that are up to their 20s now, mid-20s, that they can become anything they want. They've been brought up in an age of equality. There's no more gay bashings and segregation, black, white, yellow, red, blue. It doesn't really matter. They've grown up that it's all inclusive. And then all of a sudden, in one fell swoop, boom, divide and conquer, mother. No, that's not the way it is. The way it is not you can have it all together. So this anti-vaccine and vaccine thing's a big thing. Science versus religion's a big thing. There's a big divide in a generation and a half right now that it's wrong. We've dragged them into this beautiful place of humanity, then all of a sudden they've put them back into what we were raised in almost. And these kids, I feel sorry for them. They were creating where we should go.
Okay, so how does like what's just being said, how does that work? The vector equilibrium is the true zero reference of energetic mathematics.
Vector.
I think vector equilibrium is the ultimate state. It's where you want to be.
Is the center?
Yeah, the veritas. Once you're there, there is no more to do.
No.
No, the vector equilibrium has the possibility within the bindings between its points to jitterbug. And so when I spent this time with the Resonance Science Foundation looking at trying to resolve Einstein's field equations with spherical geometry rather than planar geometry, it turns out that we can use the vector equilibrium using Planck constants for each of its individual lengths. And then if we allow for that jitterbug compression expansion, that there is a fluidity possible within a vector equilibrium. So in one moment it's fully expanded, but in another moment it can compress at units. And as it does that and transmits along its expanded geometry as it approaches the next vector equilibrium, it can transmit information simultaneously. And this is very important that it does have a zero phase that is everything, but it also has the possibility of movement, which is everything.
And so when you're looking at it from that way of looking at it, Susan, a lot of the stuff that we do talks about linear balance. And I think that's what Fuller was about. He's about saying, you've got to look at the energetic mathematics as an equilibrium, not as this linear balance, like this is right, this is wrong. And when you're looking at it, and law, more than anything, in my opinion, today, is what's really causing the twisting and turning. As the stuff that John's talking about, it's like it's almost gone berserk. It's like instead of only having to deal with a couple monarchs, we've got thousands of the buggers now, and they use the law because they can afford to use the law. So,
Because the law is available for purchase.
but it's not energetic mathematics.
Correct. And that's why universal accounting comes out as this beautiful higher truth.
Okay, well, I think we're gonna have to, I don't think we can open another wound. I don't think we can go into another one. So I'll stop sharing and we'll start closing the call down because I do want to finish sometime today. So, Anne, how do you feel and what do you take away from today's call?
Actually, I have something to say about all the calls that we've been on the past couple of months, because I just want to let you know that regeneration has gone into our school. Yeah, it's one of the key components now in our school, because we're looking at environmental sustainability now, and that word is very passive. Yeah? So we've gone into a more powerful word, which is environmental regeneration, which is what we believe in anyway. And then now today I've got a couple more words, which is each child is a scientist. I'm going to take that on because it's exactly what we believe as well, but it's just so well put, yeah. The other one is to figure out how to pull this out as to the physical and metaphysical, because to put it out there, I've gotten a lot of, I guess, terminology, words to help us differentiate what needs to happen in education and a lot of the things that's been going on. So that's really been so powerful for me. Now I'm looking at energetic math. I just found an article on it. Let me see what I find out about it. But overall, absolutely thrilled. Thank you very much. And now to Stephen.
Well,
How do you feel?
Good, thank you. First thing I'm gonna do is go look up energetic mass because I really like the idea. It sounds to me like Star Trek. You know, I just put this thing over here, I click it and nothing can come in here except sound waves. Anyway, I like that idea. I'll tell you, my first takeaway is this question. Who's this Trump guy you've been talking about, Kelly? He went away 6 months ago. Anyway, or 8 months ago. I love Susan's idea. I don't know why I've been on her bandstand, but I love this universal accounting thing. My heart, I think that talking about all these kings and all these rulers that are using this law, we're really coming to a place of equilibrium where personal sovereignty, my right to choose a vaccine or a mask, are coming at loggerheads with this community authority. What an exciting time we live in right now. Wow. This is absolutely exciting to me. Wow, my heart is pounding. It's really tough for me. And I want to say one more thing, Kelly, sometime today, no, Joe went into tomorrow about 28 minutes ago. However, that's your today and it's my tomorrow still. I'm totally confused about that. And I'm going to ponder micro and macro and turn it over to Joe and see how he feels about being in tomorrow already, Joe.
I feel extremely fortunate to be part of this call today. This is a lot of fun on a couple different levels. But I think one of the main ones is having a new insight into partially overlapping experiences. And the idea of the soil and the tree was actually something that clicked with me. There is also the importance of drawing boundaries as well. I always think about that all the time, and it's very difficult for me to do. But you know, knowing that actually Kelly uses it as a way of actually, as a place to start thinking is that's important to me as well. The equilibrium as well. Seeing that as a micro and a macro experience was something new to me as well. Seeing the the actual curves have their own micro and macro experiences within a system was something different for me as well. I also have a lot of thoughts on the distinction between laws and aristocracies and all that, but I'm not going to go down that road. But I was a little all over the place, but I really enjoyed the call. Susan, what did you take away, and how do you feel, and what are you taking away?
I feel incredibly grateful for the overlapping that has just occurred with each of you. I'm sorry I got a call from my daughter in the middle that caused me to skip out for a moment. I am really, really hopeful about the idea that we are expanding meaning. And I love that we get to do this in an audiovisual format across multiple continents. Because the words themselves carry only so much meaning. They're so important. But what is even more important is the tone. And if we're in physical presence, we have that possibility of body language. And what actually gets communicated is so beautiful, and the words are just what carries it. And so I'm grateful every day for the possibility of overlapping with each of you. Philemon, how do you feel, and what are you taking away?
Thank you, Susan. How am I feeling? I'm feeling great now, much better. I think it's 57% on tonality, Susan, 7 on the words, and the other maths makeup on the other one. It was interesting. The first 45 minutes, there was a bit of energy in the room. The big boys turned up and had a bit of a spar. It was fun watching Stephen, Manu, and Kel really chew into it. Henry and Susan actually, and then Henry on the sideline coming in as a now and then. I just watched it for 45 minutes going, okay, there's some energy in this chat. And it was interruptions and disagreements. There was a lot of in your face kind of thing. It's probably the most in the face I've seen of each other. And it was brilliant because a lot came from it. It was a good verbal spar amongst you all, but it was challenging you all at the same time. Looking at that chart, I took a screenshot of it because it was brilliant. What we're talking about, basically the flow of it, universe, consciousness, apprehension, these words, communicated, overlapping experiences, and then equilibrium. I'm someone for many, many years, I've been telling myself the story, bite off more than you can chew and chew like crazy, jump off the cliff, and learn to build a parachute on the way down. And I've literally been living like that. And it's fun, yeah? You cop some good kicks up the arse, but you get some good wins, some really good wins. At the start of this call, I was off that cliff, or I was choking on the food. And at the end of it, as it kind of went down the definition of those words, far out, it was magic. It was like I just sailed to the end of it. It was really beautiful because that happens as someone that practices this like a junkie shooting up a drug. That's almost like so beautiful to identify that, because it is so real like that. I can write a book of my experiences about all of it and how it is always overlapping, but you don't know to the extent it's overlapping. It's based on your apprehension and how sensorially connected you are. So I am someone that's out there really loving this. It's thanks for lining them all up for me so I can have a safe landing, because I was lost looking at the sentence up first. And Susan, about 8 years ago, I read that book. You mentioned it in the thread, 933 pages. And it is a really good example that you did use in the chat. And I've got it on my bookshelf still, because when somebody says, oh, what's a good book to read? I go, yeah, read that. And tells you how serious they are about wanting to read a book or not. It's been lent out twice in all these years. That's how I feel. And that's what I got. CJ, how do you feel? What did you get out of today?
Thank you, Philemon. To be honest, at the beginning, I felt a bit lost, a bit overwhelmed with so many thought processes going on. As I gather my thought later on, something that struck my mind is what Kelly says in terms of memory and past conditioning. And then I connect to what Steve says about the trees, and then Manu connected to the nutrient and so on. It's like, okay, that is how it goes back to what I felt was the belief system, what we believe in as we brought up, and one of the things is to be mindful of what we believe in and what we want to believe in and what other make us believe in. So especially the last one, yeah. And the equilibrium thing got me thinking. I don't have an answer for the Stephen brought out a question in terms of zeros. That still got me thinking, by the way. That question still got me thinking, what is the meaning of zero? So I've been teaching math for like at least 15 years, and zero is a number that is very nice to play with. And there's so much mystery behind this number zero. And the thing is, when it comes to equilibrium, it brought back the lessons I learned in terms of engineering. Everything goes back to the state of equilibrium. No matter how you tamper with it, it will somehow move back to equilibrium. So I was just wondering, in terms of us as human beings, are we disrupting the equilibrium? And what is happening to the equilibrium that is constantly wanted to shift back into the zero state? That was something that got me like, I think I'm a bit lost, thinking very far ahead into the universe. That moment happened, and so it's cool. So I'm gonna chew on that a bit more. And thank you so much everyone for bringing those questions up. So I'm gonna pass it on to Lisa. Lisa, how do you feel, and what is your takeaway today?
Thank you, CJ. I feel really good. This was a great call, everyone. I really enjoyed it. I'm still, just like CJ said, I'm still digesting equilibrium versus balance and everything like that. I think that's going to take me a little while, and we might have to discuss it more before I really do get it, but that's okay. That is the nature of things. So I feel really good, and I'm very grateful for everybody and seeing you via the interweb. That's me. Manu, how do you feel, and what was your takeaway tonight?
I really feel good here, and I'm really happy. I'm not happy. I really find it very educative the way Becky presented the thing here. You first have a comprehensive definition, and then you go on explaining what the different terms that were put together in the comprehensive definition in certain sequence, what they mean. And that is the geometry. And that is why it is a structure that allows me to start comprehending and facilitate, my apprehension and land me in the comprehension. One thing that, for example, one example is Steve has been bugging me about is the micro in the macro. The answer is no, emphatic no. Is the core of Earth in the mantle. Yet both are in relationship. The core of the Earth and the mantle of the Earth. The core is not in the mantle. Because if you want to reach the core, you were to reach it, you come in the mantle and out of the mantle to the core. They are in relationship. And universe, in a certain way, is a set of relationship, is a thought of things exchanging in a certain way, which are principles that holds everywhere within the boundary of what we think as the universe. So that is basically my biggest takeaway. It's much easier, I think. I don't want to be pretentious, to understand what Becky is saying than to try to reinvent it. I find it a lot easier for me. And another thing that I take it from here in terms of equilibrium, I say the gyroscope is in equilibrium, yet it moves. and it will still be a gyroscope until it is impacted by something that transgresses the boundaries of the definition of the gyroscope. In other words, if I were to bang the gyroscope to bang it with a bat out of the surface of my desk, for example, where it was gyrating, it will no more be a gyroscope. It's going to be landing somewhere as something else. So as I've transgressed the boundaries, I have an impact that transgressed the boundary of the definition of what a gyroscope is. Same for life. If I go out there and I'm knocked out by a car, I'm no more living in the form that we define as life, biological life, today. So that's what I take away. Otherwise, I'm really grateful for the exchange. I'm really grateful that we have agreement, that we keep to the agreement, and that we are accountable to the agreement that we are. We don't get angry when we disagree, and we punch at each other and take it and happy. I see Henry is still smiling despite the knock yesterday that he gave me, but anyway, it's still Henry. There's another opportunity. That's what I take away. Thank you all. Hey, John, how do you feel? John Bean.
I feel very grateful. And
What do you take away? Yeah.
Well, it's been an enjoyable ride. Every one of these sessions is a roller coaster ride for me of sorts. And sometimes I feel that I understand very little, and sometimes I feel I understand a lot, and then that feeling disappears again. And so it's like an expanding and contracting belief on my part that maybe I've understood something and maybe I haven't, maybe I've understood something. But the ride was particularly enjoyable today. So I think it's more how I feel after the ride than whether I really understand anything or not. I'm just glad I was on the ride. So who hasn't had their say yet?
I think Henry.
Henry, so how do you feel and what do you take out of today?
Yeah, thank you, John. Feeling pretty good, feeling good. I enjoyed the call. It was, yeah, a lot of energy, and it just shows you the wealth of experience, overlapping experience that we all have, and everyone has something to contribute, which is really great. There were a couple of things that yeah, started to get me thinking, and I'll have to think a lot more on. And it was about equilibrium and I guess the differences between equilibrium and balance. And that statement about zero pulsation in vector equilibrium is the nearest approach we'll ever know to eternity and God. I like that. You know, that's a state, I guess, I'm thinking about what is the equilibrium state? How can I apply that to me? How can I get to that position where I want to be? Or is it a position I want to be? Things to think about. So there was a lot in it. So I thank you for everyone for contributing. So yeah, looking forward to it. Next week will be good. I mean, the Wounded Springboks. That'd be an interesting game.
One more week, Henry. One more week.
We'll see who the world champions are, right? So that's how I feel, and that's what I got out of the call.
A world champion knows how to lose.
All Black, mate, All Blacks. Kelly, how you feeling, and what'd you get out of the call, man?
Well, I like the fact that we can have a good laugh at the end of it, even if it is at the expense of Manu. You know? I've got so many different thoughts going through my head around equilibrium and energy and memory, and it's really it's hard for me to tie it all together in the sense of I'm really just a very pragmatic guy. I like to say, okay, well, I've sat down, we've done this, how do I apply it? I'm always, how can I apply that? Because I am a person who learns primarily from experience. And it's very important to me to be able to apply it, and apply it in terms of relationship and interrelationship, and you know, even work out formulas and say, okay, if I do this, and I really do watch very closely energy in business, and I watch where it's flowing and where it's not flowing. And I really do believe in this idea that it's a generalized principle. Energy flows in the least line of resistance. Energy always flows, right? And just because it's not flowing in my direction doesn't mean it's going to stop flowing. It just means it's flowing somewhere else. And if it's not doing what I want it to do, then maybe I better realize there's something greater than me. And the other thing that I really take away from this call is every time we finish this call, and I am not religious, God has played the part. You know, every time I wake up in the morning, God has played the part. Because if it's not going on, if the conscious environment, the conscious universe is not going on, I won't be going on. I believe that very strongly. I believe very strongly that, you know, every minute, you know, that we're not vibrating and exploding into somewhere else, then God's played his bit, or whatever God is. And I don't take it, you know, I'm not the guy that's going to go to church on the matter, but I'm a person who understands that if I'm here tomorrow morning and I get to watch the NFL, God's played his part. So from that point of view, that's why I like Fuller. I don't think Fuller was religious at all. I do think that he understood God. And I think scientists, as they get more and more into the experience, start to understand the meaning of God. So I'm thankful that we have it. And I'm thankful that we got through this call. We are, in fact, 13 minutes early, so I'm starting to give you back time that I stole from you earlier. And we're probably, you know, if we're looking at from energetic balance, we're probably only about 2 or 3 days out, you know, in time. So thank you to everybody on the call, and I really appreciate it. And you know, I don't know what the big boys are, and when they're swinging, I don't have time to think about whether it's a big boy or whether I'm swinging. I just know, hang on and just be willing to go wherever it goes. So thank you for everyone on the call. We'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks for the
Thank
ride,
you.
guys.
Thank you, Kelly. Take care, everyone.
Yeah, bye everyone.